We often forget that kindness doesn't need an audience. That some of the most beautiful acts of humanity happen when no one's watching, when the gesture isn't meant to impress, but to simply connect. Imagine walking into a restaurant, just trying to do your job, mopping floors, clearing tables, and finding yourself face to face with two people you'd never expect. One, a world-famous actor, and the other, an elderly woman who can't hear a word you say. But what if that woman, humble, soft-spoken, smiling politely, was more than she seemed? And what if a janitor's simple act of kindness in that quiet moment changed both of their lives forever? That's exactly what happened the day Jasonstatham's deaf mother sat down at a cafe, unable to read the menu, and the janitor, a stranger no one noticed before, stepped forward to help. He didn't know who she was. He didn't know who her son was. But when he began signing to her, something remarkable unfolded, a story that would travel across the world. Before we continue, if you've been following our stories, you know this isn't about fame or fortune. It's about those everyday moments where empathy becomes louder than words. And today's story, it'll remind you that sometimes the quietest people carry the biggest hearts, and one act of compassion can echo far beyond what anyone expects. The day began like every other. The sun had just begun to stretch its light through the tall glass windows of the Royal Oak Hotel, a place where breakfast smelled like money and the walls seemed to whisper with class. The marble floors gleamed, the silver cutlery sparkled, guests moved quietly, wrapped in tailored suits and perfume worth more than most people's monthly wage. But in that same hotel, there was Marcus, the janitor, the man who saw everything from the ground up. Every morning before anyone else arrived, he'd unlock the maintenance closet, pull on his navy blue uniform, and whisper to himself, "Let's make it shine today." He wasn't bitter about his work. He'd learned a long time ago that dignity doesn't come from your job title, it comes from how you do it. His hands were rough, calloused from years of scrubbing and fixing, but his heart, gentle, the kind of gentle that doesn't fade even after life's hardest blows. Marcus had once dreamed of being a teacher. He loved people, loved helping others find their way. But life had a different path for him, one that came with bills, loss, and responsibility. When his mother got sick, he dropped out of college to care for her. When she passed, he promised himself he'd honor her by being kind to everyone he met. So he smiled always, even when people didn't look him in the eye, even when they didn't see him at all. Because that's the thing about invisible people, they often see the world clearer than anyone else. That morning, as Marcus mopped the floor near the dining hall, he heard the low hum of conversation and laughter, the morning rush of guests ordering lattes and croissants. He stayed out of sight, moving quietly, head down, humming under his breath. Then suddenly, he noticed someone sitting alone at a corner table. An elderly woman. She was well-dressed, not in a showy way, but in the quiet confidence of someone who didn't need to prove anything. A light gray cardigan, pearl earrings, and a faint scent of jasmine that carried even from a few feet away. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up the menu. Her eyes scanned the page, but her expression slowly changed from focus to confusion to worry. She tried calling the waiter, but when he spoke, she didn't respond. She just smiled politely, pointing at the menu again, unsure. Marcus watched for a moment, then realized she wasn't ignoring him. She couldn't hear him. She was deaf. The waiter, impatient, tapped the menu and spoke louder. "Ma'am, what would you like? Breakfast ends in 15 minutes. The woman flinched, not at his tone, but because she couldn't understand his words. She looked down again, embarrassed. A few tables away, some guests began whispering. One chuckled. "Poor thing probably shouldn't be eating alone," another murmured. Marcus clenched his jaw. He hated that kind of cruelty, the quiet kind, the kind that hides behind manners and smiles. Before he even realized it, he'd set the mop aside and walked toward her table. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said gently. No response. Then he did something that made the waiter freeze mid-step. Marcus raised his hands and began to sign. "Good morning," he signed, slow and clear. "Are you okay?" The woman blinked in surprise, then her eyes widened. She smiled, the kind of smile that said, "Finally, someone understands." She signed back quickly, her hands trembling with excitement. You know sign language? Marcus nodded, a little. My mom was deaf. Her shoulders relaxed. She signed again, slowly this time. I can't read the menu. The print is small. Could you help me order something simple? Marcus smiled warmly. Of course. He turned to the waiter who was still standing there, confused and a little embarrassed. She just needs help reading the menu, Marcus said firmly. Get her some tea and scrambled eggs, yeah, and make sure it's warm, not hot. The waiter nodded quickly and rushed off. Marcus turned back to her. You're all set, tea and eggs coming right up. The woman clasped her hands together, tears brimming in her eyes. Thank you, she signed. People usually just walk away. Marcus chuckled softly. Well, my mum taught me better than that. They talked for a while, or rather signed. Slowly, deliberately, like two people learning to dance. She told him her name was Evelyn. She'd lost her hearing when she was 35, after an infection damaged her eardrums. For years, she'd struggled to adjust, reading lips, learning signs, hiding her pain behind polite smiles. Marcus listened, truly listened, with his eyes and his heart. He didn't interrupt, didn't rush, just nodded and smiled as she spoke through her hands. When her food arrived, she gestured for him to sit with her. He hesitated. I can't, ma'am, I'm working. She smiled mischievously. Then just stand and talk while I eat. No rules against kindness, right? Marcus laughed, guess not. As Evelyn ate, they continued their quiet conversation. She told him about her son, a man who rarely got time off, always traveling, always busy, but who still called her every day just to say he loved her. He's a good boy, she said aloud softly, though her own voice sounded unfamiliar to her ears. He's always been my protector. Marcus smiled. He sounds like a lucky man to have you. She grinned, eyes twinkling. That's what I tell him. When she finished her breakfast, Evelyn reached into her purse and handed Marcus a small notepad. She wrote on it, Thank you for speaking my language. You made my day. Marcus smiled and wrote back, You remind me of my mum. She used to call sign language the voice of kindness. Evelyn's eyes softened. She reached across the table, gently touching his hand. She raised a good man. Marcus walked back to his cleaning cart, heart lighter than it had been in weeks. He didn't know who she really was. He didn't know that the kind old lady he just helped was Jasonstatham's mother. He just knew he'd done something right. Something human. Later that morning, Jason arrived at the hotel quietly, wearing his usual black jacket and calm composure. He hated attention, and this trip was supposed to be private. When he walked into the restaurant, he spotted his mother immediately, sitting with a cup of tea, looking happier than he'd seen her in months. Hey, Mum, he said softly, sitting down beside her. Evelyn turned and smiled, her eyes lighting up. She reached for her son's hand and quickly signed something that made him pause. What's that? He asked, watching her hands move gracefully. She signed again, slower. He spoke my language. Jason frowned. Who? She pointed toward Marcus, who was wiping a table in the corner, quietly humming as always. Jason's eyes followed her finger, then softened. That guy. Evelyn nodded. He helped me order, treated me like a person, not a problem. Jason turned to look again. The janitor didn't even notice him. No expectation, no pretense, just a man doing his job with quiet pride. Jason smiled faintly. Yeah, he's one of the good ones. When the waiter came by to refill their cups, Evelyn wrote a note on her napkin and handed it to him. Please tell your manager that your janitor deserves recognition. He's a blessing. The waiter nodded, confused but polite. Jason chuckled. Mum, you really don't have to. She gave him that look, the one that meant don't argue with me, young man. He raised his hands in surrender. All right, all right. When breakfast ended, Jason helped her up, but before they left, Evelyn turned back toward Marcus's corner. He looked up and smiled at her, that same genuine, quiet smile he gave everyone. She signed across the room, thank you. He signed back, my pleasure. Jason watched the exchange silently, something stirring deep inside him. His mother's hands moved again. Be kind to him. Jason frowned slightly, not understanding at first. until her next sign spelled it out. He's special. Jason nodded slowly. Yeah, he murmured under his breath. I can see that. By noon, the restaurant returned to its usual rhythm. The sound of plates clinking, laughter, and polished heels on marble. Marcus continued working, unaware that the quiet act of compassion he'd shown that morning had already begun to ripple outward. Because later that afternoon, Jasonstatham, yes, the Jasonstatham walked into the manager's office with his mother's note in hand and said, I want to talk about one of your employees. The manager froze. Is there a problem, Mr. Statham? Jason smiled faintly. No, there's something right, and I want to make sure it's not ignored. That evening, Marcus finished his shift late. His back ached, his hands smelled faintly of bleach, and his eyes were heavy with exhaustion. As he packed up his supplies, the manager approached him. Marcus, he said, you've got a visitor. Marcus blinked. A visitor for me. The manager nodded toward the doorway. And there, standing by the window, was Jasonstatham, hands in his pockets, wearing a faint smile. Marcus froze. Wait, you're... Jason raised a hand, chuckling. Yeah, I get that a lot. Marcus wiped his palms nervously on his uniform. I didn't know. Jason stepped forward. You didn't have to. You helped my mum this morning, signed for her, treated her like a human being when most people wouldn't even look her in the eye. Marcus swallowed hard. She's a lovely lady, reminds me of my own mum. Jason's expression softened. She said the same about you. The two men stood in silence for a moment, different worlds, same heart. Finally, Jason spoke. Listen, mate, I don't usually do this kind of thing, but people like you, they deserve to be seen. Marcus blinked, confused. What do you mean? Jason smiled. You'll find out tomorrow, just promise me one thing. What's that? Jason extended his hand. Never stop being that guy. Marcus hesitated, then shook his hand firmly. Never will. As Jason left, Marcus stood there for a long while, staring at the reflection of the city lights on the restaurant glass. He didn't know what was coming. He didn't know his quiet moment of compassion had just set off a chain of events that would change his life forever. But that night, he went home with something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Because sometimes, the world doesn't reward you when you expect it. It rewards you when you forget yourself in kindness. The next morning, the Royal Oak Hotel was unusually quiet. The early light filtered through the lobby windows, golden and soft, making the marble floors gleam like liquid fire. But for Marcus, something felt different, like the air itself was humming with curiosity. Whispers followed him wherever he went. Did you hear? They say someone important asked for him. Who? The janitor, Marcus. He tried to ignore it, focused on his routine, mop in hand, bucket trailing behind. But deep down, his stomach twisted with unease. He wasn't used to attention. He'd built his life around not being noticed, around doing good quietly with no cameras, no thanks. And yet, when he turned the corner near the dining hall, he froze. Because standing there, surrounded by the hotel manager, the staff, and half a dozen curious onlookers, was Jasonstatham. Again. Morning, mate, Jason said with a grin, hands in his pockets like it was the most casual thing in the world. Marcus blinked. Morning. The manager practically jumped in. Marcus, Mr. Statham wanted to see you personally. I didn't know you two had already met. Jason smirked. Oh, we've met yesterday. He just didn't know who I was at the time. Marcus shifted nervously. Sir, if this is about what happened with your mum. Jason held up a hand. Exactly, it's because of that. He turned slightly, and from the doorway came Evelyn, elegant as ever, her hair neatly pinned, her soft cardigan replaced by a long coat. Her eyes sparkled when she saw Marcus. He smiled instinctively. Morning, ma'am. She lifted her hands and signed. Good to see you again, kind soul. Jason translated aloud for everyone. She says it's good to see you again, Marcus. The room went quiet. Staff members exchanged confused glances, unsure how to react. Evelyn stepped closer, her gaze warm. Then she pulled something out of her purse, a small envelope, and held it out to him. Marcus frowned. Ma'am, what's this? Jason stepped in. Before you open that, there's something you need to know." He gestured toward his mother. "This woman, my mum, she's not just anyone. She's one of the biggest private donors to hospitals and schools across the UK. She's been doing it quietly for years." Marcus blinked. "Wait, what?" Jason nodded. "She doesn't talk about it, doesn't like the spotlight, but the truth is my mum's a billionaire. She just never acts like one." Gasps rippled through the staff. Marcus stared dumbfounded. "Billionaire her." Evelyn chuckled softly, signing as Jason translated. "Money doesn't define you, heart does. And you, young man, have the kind of heart this world needs." Marcus swallowed hard, overwhelmed. "Ma'am, I was just doing what anyone should do." Jason smiled knowingly. "Yeah, but not everyone does." Evelyn gestured for him to open the envelope. His rough hands trembled slightly as he tore it open. Inside was a folded note and a small silver card. The note read, "Dear Marcus, you reminded me that kindness still speaks louder than wealth. You made me feel seen, and for someone who spent years in silence, that's the greatest gift you could give. This card is an invitation, not to charity, but to opportunity. You'll know what to do when the time comes. With love and gratitude, Evelyn Statham." Marcus frowned, turning the card over. It had no logo, no words, just a simple embossed emblem, E's Foundation. "What's this?" he asked softly. Jason grinned. "That's her foundation. She's inviting you to join something bigger, you'll see." For the rest of the day, Marcus couldn't think straight. Everyone at work treated him differently now, some with admiration, others with envy. But Marcus stayed grounded. He cleaned the same halls, polished the same tables, smiled the same way. Because to him, yesterday's act hadn't been special. It had just been right. Still, that card burned a hole in his pocket all day. That night, when he finally got home, to his small flat, walls lined with faded photographs of his late mother, he placed the card on his table and stared at it for a long time. His mother's picture smiled back at him. "Guess I did something right, huh, Mum?" he whispered. The next morning, Marcus received a call. It was the manager again. "Marcus, there's a car waiting for you outside. A driver says he's here on behalf of Mrs. Statham." Marcus nearly dropped the phone. "You're joking." "No joke, and he's dressed better than our general manager, so I'd go." Half an hour later, Marcus found himself sitting in the backseat of a sleek black car, driving through the city toward a part of town he'd never been to before, quiet streets lined with trees, the kind of place where wealth whispered instead of shouted. When they stopped, he stepped out in front of a tall glass building with a golden sign that read, "The Evelyn Statham Foundation for Communication and Inclusion." Marcus's heart pounded. Inside, the lobby was full of children, some signing to each other, some wearing hearing aids, some smiling as volunteers taught them to read lips and draw. And there at the center of it all was Evelyn. She waved when she saw him, and Jason stood beside her, hands in his pockets, looking proud. "Glad you came," Jason said. "Welcome to my mum's other world." Evelyn signed, and Jason interpreted as she spoke. "This is what she's been building for years," Jason explained. "A safe space for people who are deaf or hard of hearing, kids, adults, families. Places where communication isn't a wall, it's a bridge." Marcus nodded slowly, taking it all in. "It's incredible." Jason's voice softened. "She told me last night that for years she's been looking for someone to help expand it, someone who understands what it means to connect through empathy, not money." Marcus frowned. "You mean?" Evelyn stepped closer, smiling warmly. She signed slowly, deliberately. "I want you to join us." Jason grinned. "She wants you on the team, Marcus, to be part of the foundation." Marcus blinked. "Me, I'm just a janitor." Jason shook his head. "You're the reason this place exists, people like you. Mum doesn't hire based on resumes. She hires based on character." For the first time in years, Marcus felt his throat tighten. "I don't know what to say." Evelyn smiled gently. "Say yes." Marcus laughed softly. "Yes." Over the next few weeks, Marcus's life began to shift in ways he never could have imagined. He started helping out at the foundation after work, mopping floors at first, then staying longer to assist with events, organizing workshops, even learning to teach sign language to new volunteers. The kids loved him. They called him Mr. M and followed him everywhere. He taught them jokes in sign, told them stories about his mum, and listened when they needed someone who understood. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't about fame. It was about purpose. One afternoon, Jason stopped by unexpectedly. "Blimey," he said, watching Marcus surrounded by laughing kids. "Looks like you've got fans." Marcus chuckled. "They keep me young." Jason smirked. "Mum says you've been running this place better than her directors." Marcus shook his head. "Nah, I just do what needs doing." Jason leaned against the wall. "Funny, that's what she said about herself when she built all this." They shared a quiet laugh, the kind that comes from mutual respect. But fame, as it always does, eventually caught up. A journalist covering Jason's new film caught wind of the story. Janitor, who helped Jasonstatham's deaf mother, now runs her foundation. The headline exploded online overnight. Marcus woke up the next day to hundreds of messages, news vans outside his building, and strangers calling him a hero. He didn't like it. Not one bit. At the foundation that morning, Jason found him sitting outside, looking troubled. "Too much noise for a quiet man, huh?" Jason asked, sitting beside him. Marcus sighed. "I didn't do it for this. I don't want cameras or attention. I just wanted to help her." Jason nodded. "And that's exactly why this matters. The world's starving for people like you, Marcus. People who do good with no strings attached." Marcus looked at him. "Then tell them to stop calling me a hero." Jason grinned. "All right, but good luck convincing my mum." A week later, Evelyn invited Marcus to a small dinner. No press, no cameras, just family and staff. When he arrived, he found her seated at the head of a long oak table, surrounded by smiling faces, children from the foundation, their parents and volunteers. Evelyn signed a few words, and Jason interpreted for everyone. "She says tonight isn't about celebration," he said. "It's about gratitude for the people who remind us that kindness still exists." Then Evelyn stood, her hands trembling slightly as she gestured to Marcus. "She says," Jason translated softly, "that when she met you, she saw her own reflection, a person who listened not with ears but with his heart." The room fell silent. Marcus blinked hard, his chest tightening. "Ma'am, I don't know what to say." Evelyn smiled, reaching into her purse once again, pulling out another envelope. "This," Jason said, "is for you, but before you open it, she wants you to promise something." Marcus nodded. "Anything." "She says, don't ever stop being invisible for the right reasons." He frowned slightly, not understanding until he opened the envelope. Inside was a letter of appointment, naming him as Director of Community Outreach for the Foundation. His jaw dropped. "Director." Jason chuckled. "Told you she doesn't care about titles, but she does care about trust, and she trusts you." Marcus's eyes glistened. "I don't deserve this." Evelyn signed. "Yes, you do, because you earned it when no one was watching." Months later, the foundation expanded, new centers opened across the country, helping thousands. Marcus became its face. Though he never liked the spotlight, he used it to amplify others' voices. He spoke to schools, communities, and companies about empathy, about listening before judging, about how the smallest act can change the biggest hearts. Jason often joined him, sitting quietly at the back, smiling like a proud brother. And Evelyn, she always watched from the side, her eyes full of peace, because she knew her legacy wasn't her money. It was the kindness she passed forward, and the people like Marcus who carried it on. One evening, after a long day, Marcus walked out of the foundation into the cool night air. The city lights shimmered like stars caught in puddles. He took a deep breath, looked up, and whispered, "We did it, Mum." Then he smiled, that same humble smile that had started it all, and walked off into the quiet street, hands in his pockets, ready for tomorrow. Because in a world that often celebrates power, he discovered something far greater: the strength of compassion.